In this position, we need a doctor who will push back on the politics of this administration and focus only on the health of 22 million of us. We don't need him and the governor doing their dog and pony show across the state, talking about how masks and vaccines are useless.
Welcome back. That was State Senator Tina Polsky, a Democrat who represents Broward and Palm Beach, explaining why she was voting against the confirmation of Joseph Ladapo to be the state's Surgeon General. After being appointed by Governor Ron DeSantis last year, Dr. Ladapo visited Polsky at her Senate office, but refused to wear a mask, even though Polsky revealed to him that she had recently been diagnosed with breast cancer and was taking every precaution possible not to get COVID. But he refused, and Polsky ended the meeting. I spoke to her this week about her decision to lead the fight against Ladapo.
I think just in general, I'm an outspoken person, and I feel very comfortable kind of taking the lead and asking difficult questions. I've been doing that since I started in the legislature. But I think it was pretty natural in this case because I did have that unfortunate interaction with him several months ago. And I never got a chance to ask him questions because we never had the actual sit down in my office. We just had the unfortunate interaction. So I had a lot of questions at that time. There were hundreds of doctors who wrote into me with questions to ask. There was a lot of controversy surrounding him before anything ever happened. And then, of course, it swelled into a whole nother story. But what really bothered me, and one of the reasons that I did go public, I had to go public with my own diagnosis in order to tell the story of Dr. Ladapo, was I really think it showed his character and his temperament. And the fact that he couldn't be respectful of my wishes, and I was going through something really difficult, just shows that, he has no empathy, and he's a doctor, and he's the doctor for all of us. And it's such a simple ask. And even if he didn't believe that a mask is helpful, he could have done it just to make me comfortable because I have to be a part of his confirmation. And he didn't care. He had more fun toying with me, which is what he said when he left my office. And he would have rather have done that than actually sat down and talked to me, make his political point.
When you say he said, I'm just toying with you, what were his exact words, if you recall?
I don't recall exactly, but it was something like, I really enjoy taking it to the libs or something like that. He said to his aide when he walked out, and one of my aides heard it in the hallway. And I reported on it right away. So we had the exact words, but at the moment, it was something along those lines.
So is your opposition to him just personal?
Not at all. I had a lot of questions for him about his stances. I'm obviously very pro-vaccine, pro-booster, pro-mask, and he doesn't believe in those things, and he wouldn't say exactly what he believes in. So I really tried, at least in the first meeting, to have an open mind. I had a list of questions for him, and I never got a chance to ask. And then, of course, his behavior colored my view. I watched the other hearing, saw exactly what he's about, and he continued the exact same behavior in our questioning.
The fact that he wouldn't, for instance, say whether or not he had been vaccinated, he says that he has a right to a certain level of privacy, and certainly he does. But you made the point that there is also something about leadership, that leading by example, and people, the public, feel comfortable, knowing that their doctor, whether it's their private physician or the state's doctor who represents them, feels comfortable with the vaccines, and he wouldn't do that. What was your reaction to that?
I mean, me as a measly state senator with 500,000 constituents, I posted my vaccination. All I've done since vaccinations came out is constantly post and tell my constituents where they can go, what they should do, why it's important. That's my job. And the fact that he won't demonstrate it himself. I mean, if he had gotten the vaccine or said, I got the vaccine, I gave my children the vaccine, that would give a lot of people comfort that they too can get the vaccine. There's so many people on the fence that are vaccine hesitant. So what I was trying to get out of him is, don't you want the vaccine hesitant to get vaccinated so we can reach herd immunity? Well, then he went off on a tangent that there's no such thing as herd immunity and that vaccines don't work. But earlier in the day, he said vaccines cut down on hospitalizations, and every other scientific journal is telling us how it saves hospitalizations and death by upwards of 97 times if you're vaccinated.
The question really isn't, does the vaccine prevent COVID? Does the vaccine prevent, an increased risk of hospitalization and death? And I remember in his first hearing, and in some ways in this one, he acknowledged that that's the case. But, clearly he could have been more forceful in making that point clear, which is the most important point of all.
Absolutely. And he said vaccines wane over time. So that's why I asked the question about the booster. We all know that, even as lay people. So shouldn't he be pushing the booster? But isn't his job to save lives and to keep people healthy? So whether or not the vaccines are perfect in preventing catching the disease is not the issue so much as you said, preventing sickness, preventing hospitalizations, and of course, preventing death. So my big issue with him, and obviously I've been privy to his policies and his news conferences and everything in between all this time, is they don't care about prevention. And I'm not just talking about prevention of getting COVID, but prevention of sickness. And all they talk about is treatment. And that's only half the battle. So why on earth he won't talk about prevention, except literally healthy diet is the only thing that I heard him mention. It makes no sense to me. And that's why I don't think he's qualified to lead us through this pandemic. And God forbid, more variants down the road or some other disease that befalls us.
Well, if you don't think he's qualified, why do you think the governor selected him?
It's politics. Come on, Jim, you know that. He plays into this anti-vax, anti-mask, anti-science, anti-Fauci playbook that he has. And he thinks it's what his base is looking for. I don't know why. I mean, I think that almost all of my colleagues are vaccinated and yet, they voted for him. So it's just the governor playing games and trying to be different from the federal government and his run for presidency.
Well, your colleagues, your Republican colleagues, do you expect any of them to not vote for him?
I do not.
So what does that say? What does that say to you? What does that tell you?
It breaks my heart a little bit, to be honest, because I'm friends with a lot of them. But it's the power of leadership and the power of the governor, and they don't want to cross the line.
So let's talk about some other issues in Tallahassee. The Stop Woke Act. A lot of attention has been focused on the role this plays within the school and education system. But I think one of the things that gets overlooked is the fact that this also applies to private businesses.
So the bill not only deals with things you can't talk about in the classroom that make people feel uncomfortable, but it also applies to businesses and it applies to trainings that a business does. So most businesses are going to go through routine sexual harassment training, diversity training, perhaps unconscious bias training, which is actually something we have here in the Senate as employees. And if that training makes someone feel uncomfortable or guilty, then they potentially have a cause of action against the employer. Education is meant to expand your horizons. And that's the problem with this CRT bill, the Stop Woke bill, anti-CRT bill. That's the problem with the Don't Say Gay bill. They're trying so hard to shelter these children in classrooms. And now even grown adults in a company to shelter their poor little snowflake souls that they shouldn't hear about uncomfortable topics such as sexual harassment or discrimination on the basis of race and the history of why it is so. And so the only way to not repeat history is to learn it. And every day we see examples of our failure to teach it properly because we had Nazis marching around Orlando last weekend. And we're going backwards in time. It's really quite astonishing to me. When you talk about MAGA, to so many of us, it's about going backwards to before there was integration. That's what it sounds like they're looking for. And before there was civil rights. And that is not a place I want to go back to. And I think it's important that we point it out and we continue to expand people's minds, whether in the classroom or in a business setting.
Despite the problems surrounding his nomination, or maybe because of them, Republicans in the Senate are expected to confirm Ladapo in the coming days. We'll be right back.